It's my pleasure to introduce my friend Michael Gelb. Michael and I have known each other for quite a while. I believe we met in London. It must have been around, when was it, 1974. He and I had attended a school near Oxford, England for a year. We were at different years. And then we connected up with the Alexander Technique, and Michael trained, and then I trained. We trained about the same time. He came on the first Alexander course that I did here in America in 1979 up in Ojai, where we started, and he's been part of almost all of them ever since. This past summer, we had a wonderful time at Limerick University in Ireland for a big International Alexander Congress with well over 730 Alexander teachers and trainees. Michael was the primary speaker who actually carried the through line for the whole week. He did a fantastic job. I'd also like to say that 11 years ago, when this workshop, it has morphed throughout California since 1979, but we were in Santa Barbara. We were holding it up in Montecito, and I introduced him to a friend and student of mine named Deborah Damaski. Yay. And they subsequently got married, which I'm very thrilled. So on one level, I feel I'm responsible for the success of this. Michael Gelb is an author of many, many books. He's Body Learning, which is, and I'm not saying this because he's my friend, this is undoubtedly the best introduction to the Alexander Technique that exists. It's very clear and very well laid out very well. And the main points he's going to go over today. So Body Learning. He's also the author of How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, a best-selling book, and the author of, turn around, Creativity on Demand, his most recent book. So again, with my great pleasure, thank you for coming here. And
thanks, Michael.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Good. How many people are relatively new to the Alexander Technique? Okay, a lot of us. Good. And how many people have been studying for a while? And how many people are actual Alexander Technique teachers? Lovely. Good. Well, I thought what we do is focus, let's begin focusing primarily for people who are here for the first time. But if you're an experienced person or if you're a teacher, your job is always to put yourself into the mindset of people who are experiencing it for the first time. Because what happens with the Alexander work, just like anything else where people put in a lot of time and effort and energy in developing their expertise, is you can focus on your expertise and forget about the purpose of that expertise, which is the experience of the student. I work with chemists, and they're really brilliant people, part of the DuPont company. They have a group of chemists who have received the most patents, and they take them out of the regular laboratory and they put them in this special laboratory with an unlimited budget, basically, and their time is their own. They tell them, you've done so well for us, just get us more patents. So they're very good at getting more patents. They're really brilliant, but what they observed is when it came time to talk to the other people in DuPont about what they had patented, most other folks couldn't really understand what they were talking about. So they asked me to help them with their presentations, and I went in and said, why don't you do a practice presentation? And I'm going to pretend I'm from the marketing team, and you just be the chemistry department and tell us about your new patents. So the head of the department got up and said, well, we came up with this brilliant way of looking at the molecule. And then we tested the molecule under these circumstances, and the molecule behaved in a way that we did not expect. So we then subjected the molecule to other tests, and here's what the molecule did. Well, if you're in the marketing department of DuPont, do you care about all this stuff about the molecule? No, what do you care about? Right? How do you sell it? What cool name are we going to give it? You've heard of Teflon, Coriander, they come up with these cool names. Right? Branding. When will it be ready? Who's it for? Is it safe? and so on. So anyway, I played back the video to the chemists, and I asked them to put themselves into the mindset of the marketers. And the chief chemist said, "Oh my God, we are guilty of molecule fondling." And Alexander Technique people can be just as bad at molecule fondling as the chemists because we put so much time and effort. You know, you train for 3 years as an Alexander Technique teacher, and it's like getting your black belt. You know, it takes about 3-4 years of regular training to get your black belt in most serious martial arts. And what black belt means is now you're a beginner. Right? Now you've learned enough to begin learning this art and sharing it with other people. So it's the same thing with the Alexander Technique. You trained for 3 years. Now you just got your black belt, which means in Japanese that's shodan, which means first step. Now you're a beginner in introducing the technique to other people. So I thought we'd all zero in together, whether we have lots of experience or whether this is your first week of being around the technique, to consider what is this? What are we doing here? I mean, yes, it's a nice view, but why are we lining up behind people in the morning? Why are we having these private lessons? What's the point? Why are we doing this? So actually, I thought I'd begin by asking you, why are you doing this? Why are you here? Anybody, why are you doing this?
Because it gives results.
Pardon?
It gives results.
What kind of results?
Beneficial for your being, for your personal being.
So your personal being. What about your personal being?
Beneficial in the physical way, in the mental way, in the life.
And what about so something physical, something mental, something enlivening?
Less stress, better.
Less stress. So it helps you manage your stress more effectively. Yes?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you, yes.
I came here, I said, this is my body, this is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
All these different things, I still slump, I still judge, I do all these different things. How can I use this body without any stress?
How can you use it without any stress? Or maybe with just the right, dying is good, you know, we can help you float up out of here. That's the only way you're gonna do with it, any stress. But I think you mean appropriate stress, right?
Yes.
Having the right amount of energy in the right place at the right time. So that's something we're all seeking, have the right amount of energy in the right. Poise is another name for that. Yes? It's another way of saying overcoming stress or working intelligently with stress. We can say poise. We want to learn poise. We want to have the right amount of energy in the right place at the right time. Anybody in pain?
Pain, yeah.
Pain, yes. Pain. So anybody try a lot of other things and then find their way to the Alexander Technique? Yes. Yes. So this is one of the most, this will keep the Alexander Technique in business for years to come. No, just because it works. I remember when I was training as an Alexander Technique teacher, they had a huge advertising campaign for Heineken beer. And this was back in the days when Heineken actually was really good beer. It was still artisanal before they made it, you know, just global mass market stuff. It actually used to be really good. And they had a picture of a fellow on the billboard with a droopy mustache. And then in the next frame, he's drinking a Heineken, and in the next frame, his mustache is upright again. And the caption said, Heineken reaches the parts that other beers can't reach. And I always used to think as I go in the underground in London, I said, that's what the Alexander Technique does. It reaches the parts that other things don't reach. And here's why. The pain that, the technique, I do it, the main reason I fell in love with it is I just couldn't believe it felt so good. I just felt better. I had an Alexander lesson, I felt better. And I didn't have pain in particular. I had no physical problem, I just felt better. I like feeling buoyant. I like feeling light and free to move. Now over the years I've had pain from various injuries and so on. And here's where the Alexander Technique helps when it comes to pain. It's what John Dewey called overcoming compensatory maladjustments. Have you heard that phrase? It's a great phrase, compensatory maladjustments. So if you've ever had surgery, if you've ever had an injury, if you've ever had any kind of serious illness, if you've had a concussion, whatever has happened to you, there's the trauma of what's happened to you, and then there's the habits that grow up around that trauma. So the lesion that was the problem that was fixed by the surgery, for example, that's solved, but the habits you developed of compensating and maladjusting and moving in a certain way to protect yourself from the feelings of pain associated with that trauma, they don't go away unless you consciously become aware of them and free yourself from them. That's why the Alexander Technique is all, people say it's a miracle. I tried all this stuff, nothing worked, and I found the way to, because it's just really, if your real problem is being caused or exacerbated by compensatory maladjustments, then you've come to the right place, because that's what the technique does, that in a way that I've never discovered anything else. Right? So harmonizing our relationship with stress and transforming it into poise, overcoming pain, especially that caused by compensatory maladjustments. Any performers here? So why are you here? Why are there so many performers here?
To perform better.
And so how does it help you perform better?
Gets me out of my own way so that the music can play through me rather than me making the music.
So in other words, when it comes to fine art like singing, or if you're on stage, or who plays an instrument? Are you playing an instrument? The way if you're poised, the voice comes through you more effortlessly. That's what it seems to me you're saying, yes? If you're poised, if you have the right amount of energy in the right place at the right time, the notes come out of the flute more sweetly and effortlessly. It's just not the case.
Correct.
Performers, correct, right? So, and I learned this when I went to train as an Alexander Technique teacher. My teachers were both professional violinists before they became Alexander Technique teachers. And we had a lot of professional musicians in my class, and I didn't have a particularly refined ear, but it was obvious that somebody would be playing the violin, and then Paul or Betty would come and put their hands on them and get them to stop doing it the way they were doing it, get them to pause, and they would ease up a little bit, and they looked a little brighter and happier, and then they'd start playing the violin again, and it sounded way better. It was that obvious to me. So I figured, okay, well, that's why they teach it at the Juilliard School. That's why they teach it at the Royal Academy of Drama, Royal Academy of Music. That's why it is the trade secret of so many actors and performers from all different walks of life. So actually, I anticipated what you might be saying here, and I put it, why do we do this? To overcome pain, especially if it's caused by compensatory maladjustment, to refine performance, and then I put mindfulness as the category of I want more poise, I want more awareness, I want more self-knowledge. Because it does make you more aware of yourself, doesn't it? How does it do that? Everybody talks about mindfulness. It's a big thing now. My clients all want mindfulness in business. It just means wake up and pay attention. But how do you wake up and pay attention? How does the Alexander Technique help you with that?
Stay in present time.
And how does it help you stay in present time?
Awareness.
Awareness of what?
Self.
What do we mean by self?
Physical.
Physical.
Mental, emotional.
Physical, mental, emotional. And how do you know if you're having a physical sensation or an emotion or a thought? How do you know that?
Observe it.
And what, if it's a figure ground, this consciousness thing is the watching it all. Where is the screen? How do things come up on the screen? How do we know that things are happening to us? How do we know that there's change? How do you know that you're here?
Use your brain.
You use your brain.
Receive it in your senses.
What sense is most important for this receptivity? The kinesthetic sense. This is training your kinesthetic awareness. That's the figure ground. That's the framework in which it's all happening. That's how you know if you're comfortable or not comfortable. I mean, you interpret it, but you're getting pure fundamental sensations, which you then interpret and give labels to. And if you can change the sensitivity, the awareness, the immediacy, and the accuracy of that kinesthetic sense, that would make you a much more mindful person, would it not? Say yes. Kinesthetic is your sense of weight, position, and movement. Weight, position, and movement. They also call it proprioception. Okay, weight, position, and movement. Because if you close your eyes, how do you know you're here? Right? You feel so do it right now. Scan yourself. You do a scan of yourself. You have sensations, internal sensations. That's your kinesthetic sense. It's giving you feedback all the time. And in my experience, the Alexander technique refines your kinesthetic awareness. And guess what? If you don't have a practice like the Alexander technique, what's going to happen to your kinesthetic awareness every decade of your life?
It's gonna atrophy.
It's going to atrophy. It's going to atrophy. And you get less and less in touch with yourself and who you are, less mindful, less aware, more ridden with compensatory maladjustments, and less good at singing or playing an instrument. So we want to get better at all those things. So it's this wonderful self-corrective mechanism. So who is this Alexander guy? What do you know about him?
He was an actor.
He was an actor.
Voice,
He lost his voice.
and then wanted to observe how he had performed, and then figured out what he had been doing wrong, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty good. No, that's a great start. So he was an actor. We all know he was an actor, right? Australia, originally from Tasmania. And he used to do Shakespearean performances, one-man shows, tragedy and comedy, very popular at that time. But he started to lose his voice in the middle of performances. So what did he do? If you were an actor and you lost your voice, what would be the first thing you'd do if you didn't know yet? If nobody had yet discovered the Alexander technique, what would you do? You went to doctors, teachers, voice therapists. They told him, rest your voice, try these sprays, do this. He did it all, yes? Didn't work, right? A lot of people would have just given up. But what was his first profound realization?
That he's doing it to himself.
Right? That he was doing it to himself. He said, I realized it must be something that I am doing with myself that is at the cause of the problem. So then he set about to find out, okay, what am I doing? Now, why are we going through this? Because this is the Alexander technique. It's not the teacher putting their hands on you. That's to help you refine your kinesthetic sense so that you can practice this responsibility for yourself independently. So you're asking the question, you're getting your students, if you're a teacher, to ask the question, what am I doing with myself? And what are the consequences of what I'm doing? It's so fundamental, it's so logical. This is what I call the first operational principle of the Alexander technique. Use affects function. Use affects function. If it didn't, we wouldn't be here. There would be no Alexander technique. And what is use? What did he mean? What does use mean? You know what heredity is. You know what environment is.
Input.
How you use your body.
Right? So how you use your body. And that there's a presupposition underlying that statement, which is what?
Choice.
You've got a choice about how you use your body. You have a choice. And be really clear, some choices are better than others. And so the first thing you're doing as an Alexander student and as a teacher is you're becoming a scientist of the way use affects functioning. You are studying how patterns of use, how choices that we make moment to moment affect our functioning. And what's great about, if you're in pain, a lot of times you get feedback. You make a different choice, you have less pain. You ease up and you take the pressure off your intervertebral disc and your back hurts less. That's often the case. Or you ease up, you free yourself from the startle pattern and the stiffening and tightening and holding your breath, and you sing much better. So it affects functioning usually in fairly observable ways. One of the subtler ones, but it's pretty much immediate. I experienced it myself today a number of times in just that hands-on work I had interacting with my colleagues. You notice your breathing opens up a little bit more when you're not constricting your intervertebral disc, for example, when you're not pressing down on the spine. Take the pressure off, you can breathe a little more easily. I think there's also something I've always observed when you're giving somebody a really good Alexander lesson, you really get through to them. I love the way what Giora was talking about. He said when you experience from the life within you, you experience the life within the person you're working with, and you make a connection between the life moving within you and the life moving within them. And in that moment, when you make that connection, I notice most people smile. They just look happier, right? In the moment. I like teaching this work because I like making people come in and say, oh my God, they're complaining, that whole thing, and then they walk and say, what a gorgeous day, thank you so much. That's a great job to have. I love teaching the Alexander technique. But that wouldn't be the case if use didn't affect functioning. Right? So that's the basis on which this whole work is predicated. You have a choice in the way you use yourself, and those choices have consequences for better or worse. And here's the real kicker that you don't discover until you get older, is the margin for error gets less as the years go by. So if you begin this now, if you're younger, that's really smart. Having said that, the good news is if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you're coming for your first time, you can, as Alexander said, we can change the habits of a lifetime in a moment if we use our intelligence. Because this is about the process of using your intelligence to make wiser choices that have better implications for your function. Okay? So that's kind of simple and clear, isn't it? It's a really good reason to do the Alexander technique, to study it. It's a great way to share it with other people. So use affects functioning. Alexander found that his functioning, his vocal functioning improved when he used himself in a more intelligent way, in a more poised fashion. He also discovered, and this is the second operational principle, that everything worked together. I call it the principle of the whole person. It's become almost cliche today to talk about wholeness and mind and body, but Alexander was one of the very first people to use this kind of language in the West. This kind of language has been understood and used for millennia in ancient traditions around the world, but in Western scientific tradition, it was pretty new. He was making the scientific investigation of his own behavior, and the first thing he discovered that really surprised him was that his whole body worked as one integrated system. So in other words, what was happening in his head and neck had an effect on what was happening with his hips and knees and ankles. It had an effect on his breathing. I'll never forget this. When I had one of my very first Alexander technique lessons, and the teacher was just getting me in and out of the chair. And although the teacher had hands on my head and neck, he said to me, "Can you just release the tension in your left ankle?" And I remember thinking, how the hell do you know that I'm tensing my left ankle? Your hands are way up here. But then I used my kinesthetic sense and I did a scan. I said, whoa, I am holding on to my left ankle. And then I thought, okay, let me see if can I let go of that, and I let go of it, and my whole body just became way more mobile and free, and my breathing opened up, and I got the smile reflex, and I thought, wow, that is really cool. Plus, I was super impressed that he was more aware of my own body than I was. I thought, I really want to learn that kind of awareness. But it was just really simple. I said, oh, what's happening in my ankle is affecting what's happening in my breathing. Because every part of your body is connected to every other part. You're a whole system. So the first thing is just to get that this whole thing works all together, because that's not the way, in the construct with which most of us were raised, that is not the assumption. You go to see one specialist for your wrist, and another one for your kidney, and another one for your knee, and they won't necessarily talk to each other, and the drugs you get prescribed, they might fix one part, but they might mess up another part. So Alexander saw, first of all, that the whole system worked together physically, but then he realized that we couldn't separate the mind and the body either. In other words, he realized that the way he was thinking affected his body instantaneously. So much so that it's hard to even separate them. So everybody just slump. Give me your best slump. Really, just be as depressed and slumpy as you can be. So stay slumpy. Look at all these other miserable people in this room. Look at and stay slumpy. And can you feel joy when you're slumped? Right? Even though I'm trying to crack you up and make you laugh, it's still hard if you really stay slumped. You feel okay now. Everybody, we're posing for the cover of Alexander magazine. You are going to be the cover person. So stand at your full, sit at your full stature, your radiant, magnificent self. Be poised and upright. Have a little smile, just the hint of a little smile on your face. Now try to feel depressed without changing your stature. Can you feel depressed like this? Do you feel it? If you try to feel depressed, think of something depressed, feel how it starts to pull you down? Instantaneously. So, I mean, did you see, what's her name? Amy Cuddy. She's this professor at Harvard. She's lovely. She wrote this book called Presence. And it's, it's all over the internet, all over Twitter and Facebook. Like, it's the greatest discovery in the universe. We've discovered our research at Harvard that the way you stand affects your emotional state. Oh, stop the press. Oh my, and she's getting interviewed on NPR. And they go, really? Could that? Oh my God. Hello. But it's okay because it is getting the mainstream to pay a little bit more attention to what Alexander figured out over 100 years ago, what many of us have been working with for decades. Of course. So your mind and body are intimately linked. It's artificial to separate them. Which is just different. It's different than the mindset that dominated much of Western medicine, certainly in our lifetimes. It's beginning to change a little bit. But for us, we're being really practical. This just for us, what it means is we just have to look at ourselves holistically. We have to look at the whole system. We have to be aware that the system is one. That the way we think has immediate reflection in our bodies. And that the way we use our bodies is going to determine our freedom of thinking. And that we can't separate those. So here's the really good news. Ready for the really good news? This is part of what's the genius of Alexander, is the third operational idea, which he called the primary control. So let's say you have this whole system, mind and body are one, use affects functioning. How do you integrate it? Is there a key point of leverage for bringing it all together? Well, hallelujah. That's the primary control. And notice it's primary. What does that primary mean? It means first. So what Alexander figured out was that the first thing you need to do is prevent interference with the relationship of the head, neck, and torso. And it makes a lot of sense because what's the very first thing that happens when you are frightened or startled?
You stop
Right. Hold your breath. You can, they call it retroflexion. You pull your head back. You shorten your cervical spine. By the way, 60% of your kinesthetic receptors are in your cervical spine. So you lose your sensitivity. You tighten your neck muscles, you hold your breath. We all know the fight-flight response. Well, Dr. Frank Pierce-Jones at Tufts University studied this reaction. He had people stand, he wired them up, he used stroboscopic cameras, and then he slammed the door, shot off a shotgun. What did every single subject do? They went into that jump response, which he called the startle pattern. He said it was universal and automatic. It had the exact same characteristics every single time. People blinked their eyes, tightened their neck muscles, held their breath, and stiffened their bodies. He observed further that the startle pattern was a template for all of our responses to negative emotions. That generally, under any kind of negative stimuli, we tend to contract. Kind of makes, you're trying to protect yourself from whatever the negative stimulus happens to be. Jones observed further that for many people, the startle pattern becomes, a modified form of the startle pattern becomes their basic way of being in the world. So people walk around in a permanent, modified form of startle. You can see it just walk in the mall. You'll see, look at people driving their cars, especially in LA. So it begins with the stiffening of the neck. It begins with the retroflexion of the head. What Alexander found is if he wanted to get his voice back, if he wanted to improve his functioning by changing his use, the change he needed to make was, instead of going into the startle pattern when he thought about reciting Shakespeare, what did he need to do instead?
Something different.
What was the something different? If his head was going back and down because of the startle pattern, what direction did it need to go?
Forward and up.
Forward and up. It's just good to figure out where this stuff came from. It was the opposite of back and down. That created the negative functioning. He wanted the positive. He said, let's try. It's like George Costanza in Seinfeld. If everything you've ever done in your life up to now has been wrong, from now on do the opposite. Right? So if you've been pulling back and down, try going forward and up. And it worked. Alexander became famous on the stage for the power of his stage presence, for the effortlessness of his speaking. So this poise, this relationship, this dynamic relationship of the head, neck, and torso is what Alexander called the primary control. And primary just means that that's where you need to check first. And if you think of it really simply, average head weighs 10 to 15 pounds. If it's off balance, what's going to happen to the other segments of the body? If this 15-pound weight goes back like that, what's going to happen here? This goes forward and then I get lower. Right? So if I want to pull this back, I got to rebalance this first. Right? So it's not that this is everything. It's not that you just get your head poised and suddenly you have all doors opened unto you. We wish it was the case. No, but it just makes a lot of other good things possible. I do Aikido and Tai Chi and Qigong and Jingyi and Banhua, all these ancient Chinese arts. And tremendous emphasis on the center, on the pelvis, on the hara, right, the lower dantian. This is the center of vital energy. I call it the central control. But this is still primary. Because if you don't get this poised first, you have no hope of sorting this out. Right? It's not magic, but it just makes a lot of things possible. So primary control, get it? It's the point of leverage for the whole person so that we can have the best use and better functioning. With me so far? Yeah. See the logical progression? And if use didn't affect function, we wouldn't be here, no conversation. Since it does, okay, we say it all works together. What's the point of leverage for getting it to work together most effectively? Primary control. Balance of the head, neck, and torso. Okay, all good news up to now. Here's the tricky part. Alexander discovered that he couldn't be sure he was doing what he thought he was doing. His kinesthetic sense was not reliable. It had been distorted through patterns of misuse. He said that our sensory appreciation is unreliable. Now, here's the most important thing I've said yet, probably, is that the purpose of the Alexander technique is to make sensory appreciation reliable again. So we're here to refine, to attune the accuracy of our senses. So you get more accurate and immediate real-time information from the system. It's a more useful tool for navigating your life. The tricky thing about that is that we'd all like it if we could just, if a teacher could just put you in a permanent state of aligned perfection and you just go out and then you're done. You know, I know there's some Qigong masters, they say, oh, you know, give me $14,000 and I'll open your third eye for you and you just have total oneness. You know, if there was a deal like that, we'd be offering it. Just if you pay all the money for all your lifetime Alexander lessons at once, and we'll just put you in the Alexander position and you'll be there forever. You'll never have to work on yourself again. I know we'd all sign up for it. You'd say, hey, can I borrow some money? I just, I got this deal. This teacher's going to made me an offer I can't refuse. Except we can't do that, and it's a continuous process of refining your own kinesthetic awareness. And you're improving and you're becoming more attuned, and then you have an accident or an injury. You get an illness, you have heartbreak, you have a divorce. Something happens in your life, throws you way off. And then you're going to have to continue applying the principles. It's a continuous mindfulness practice for the rest of your life. And people say, well, how many lessons should I have? 30 lessons is good for starters. But if you really want to make this part of your life, you probably want to go get a tune-up on a regular basis. Once you get this, you don't want to be without it. Because it's just invaluable, and I just don't know. There's all sorts of other groovy, wonderful things. I've probably studied all of them, but I've never found anything quite like this. Because what this is helping us make the kinesthetic sense more accurate in the moment. And this, by the way, Alexander, you know what's so amazing is Alexander wrote in one of his first books how giving children too much sugar was perverting their sense of taste. And that's a long, long time ago, before the appalling high fructose world that we're trying to free ourselves from. So he saw that the conditions of contemporary life, and this was in the 1890s and the early 1900s. He was saying the conditions of contemporary life are debauching our sensory mechanism. Is it because we've lost touch with nature where our senses are pure and free and alive and accurate? Well, even he could not have imagined the appalling circumstances that we're challenged with today in terms of the constant device, digital, I call it triple D, digital device disorder. Right? So the purpose of the Alexander technique is to make sensory appreciation more reliable. How do you do that? Those are the last three operational principles. The first thing you do is you monitor yourself, you're monitoring your use with your refined kinesthesia that you get. You know that wonderful feeling you get when you have a lesson? Isn't it great? Frank Pierce Jones, who studied this at Tufts University, he called it the kinesthetic experience of lightness, which is the hallmark of the Alexander technique. And it's still to me just the absolute coolest thing. It's why I come here every year, because I like floating around. You know, it just feels really good to just float around. But then you go and you get in your car and somebody cuts you off and you go, but now you notice it. See, if you don't have anything to compare your habits to, you never notice. But if you get this experience of ease, of poise, of lightness, and then you go into the startle pattern, you say, whoa, what just happened? What did I just do? How could I do it differently? That's how lessons work. The real lesson is after you leave the lesson. It's you putting into practice through these operational principles the kinesthetic enlightenment that your teacher gave you. So, inhibition, it's not Freudian inhibition. Alexandrian inhibition is simply learning to leave out that which does not serve you. So when you hear people, some Alexander jargon, non-doing, undoing, leave yourself alone. For a lot of beginners, you're having one of your first lessons. I just actually I gave a lesson the other day, and I asked my student, I said, let me just move your arm for you. And she could not let me hold her arm. She was holding on to it and didn't know she was doing it. She's one of those people, she's a very nice, helpful person, but she's paying me. So I said, you're paying me, why don't you let me move your arm for you? I like a little humor. And so she had to get very quiet and really use her intention. And she was able to let me move her arm for her. And in that, do you understand what's happening when she makes the choice to let go of that habitual tension of holding on to her arm and making the movement for me versus letting me move her arm for her? That's called freedom. People talk about inner freedom. We're talking about it really specifically, really in a very practical way. And the key to that inner freedom is what Alexander called inhibition. It's your freedom to choose what you will or will not. And I love the Alexandrian phrase. You say, give your consent. You give your consent to make the movement. And really, if you had to choose one thing to practice the Alexander technique, in terms of actual practice, inhibition is most of the technique. If you just not do whatever it is you're about to do that will interfere with your functioning, your life you will function better. So what's direction? It's just the yin-yang way of thinking of inhibition. Direction is just a yang, more yang-oriented way of thinking about what you're aiming to bring about with inhibition. And in a simple way to think about it is gravity is pulling us down. So we want to go up. It's fairly simple if you think about it that way. Right? There's forces all around you pulling you down. Direction is the opposite. So direction, another way to think about direction is it's just the, and what's great is we didn't know this scientifically when Alexander figured it out, but you instantly change your muscle tone by the way you think. Right? So, actually this is a fun one to do. Just rub your hands together for a second, please. And then take, you see these lines at the bottom of your wrists here? Match them up. Match them up. And look at your fingers. You see that they're, for most people, pretty much the same length on either hand, yeah? Match them up properly. Okay, so now put your left hand down, take your right hand, and look at your index finger, your middle finger, and your ring finger in your right hand, and just invite them to grow. Look up at the ceiling and point them up to the ceiling and command your fingers to grow, grow, index finger growing, middle finger growing, ring finger growing, fingers growing, fingers lengthening, lengthening, up to the sky, fingers lengthening, lengthening, grow, grow, grow. Okay, bring the two lines together. Okay, so now command them to just be the same size again. So, it's not mystical, it's just the way, when you think in direct energy, direct attention, you get an immediate change. And that, what's great now is we can measure it using electromyographical equipment. What's his name, Bess Majid at Emory University did this 40 years ago. I wrote about it in the first edition of Body Learning. He wired people up with electrodes to individual motor units, tiny, tiny little bundles related to the muscles in their forearm. And then without any gross movement, he just had them think about changing what they were seeing on the electrical. They had little blips on the screen that were measuring the electrical firing. And then they had audio amplifiers so that they could make sounds. And he had them change the blips on the screens and make different sounds just by thinking about it. No gross movement. Some people got so skilled they were playing complex rhythms. One guy was able to go da-da-dum, 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 dum, dum, da-da-dum. They're playing notes and rhythms on this audio amplifier, measuring the electrical firing of individual motor units in their arms, just by thinking about it. So we've known now for many, many years that what Alexander figured out, that it all works together, mind and body are one, is indeed accurate. So how do you leverage this for the best possible use? Well, inhibit anything that interferes with your natural poise and coordination. And the opposite of back and down is forward and up. The opposite of collapsing into gravity is lengthening.
Why? Why did it happen? I mean, growing. You get
Just-
older.
That's because why it happens is that your intention is instantly manifest in the organism. So, in other words, what it suggests is, like what we're doing, if you can grow your finger just there, as most of us experience in just a few seconds, what can you do to your whole spine? This is why we're thinking lengthen, forward and up, all the stuff, all the directions you're getting from your teacher. It has an effect. Attention to the means whereby. What does that mean? It's been commonly misconstrued to mean that you shouldn't pursue goals. People say, oh, no, that's end gaining. You're grasping after the result. That's obviously silly. Alexander was very goal-oriented. He wanted to be a great Shakespearean actor. He wanted to be Alexander, founder of the Alexander technique. He was very successful. He had a great practice. He wore Savile Row suits. He had a fabulous collection of Bordeaux. He drank great cognac. He had fine cigars. He was a very successful guy, and he loved it. He loved hanging out with all rich and successful lords and ladies, patrons, scientists, Nobel Prize winners. That was his milieu. He was very goal-directed. He was just trying to teach us how to intelligently achieve goals. How to achieve goals in a way that is smarter than our automatic, unconscious reflex might guide us to pursue those goals. So, one of my favorite examples of this is when I learned how to juggle. I saw somebody juggling and I just thought it was incredibly cool. It looked to me like moving sculpture. And I really wanted to learn it. So I went up to this great juggler and I asked him to teach me. But you know what he told me? He said, take these 3 balls, throw them up, don't let any of them drop. Did you ever get an instruction like that in the course of your career? See, that's end gaining. I have clients. I also work with companies on cultures, helping them develop cultures that promote leadership, promote creativity and innovation. And people oftentimes are very confused because they get a mixed message from their leaders. It says, we want you to innovate, just don't make any mistakes or cost us anything by trying. Did you ever hear Gregory Bateson's research into the schizophrenic family? That means how to drive your kids crazy. You give them mixed messages. Well, that's what's happening to a lot of my corporate clients. They're getting mixed messages between the vision, the mission, and the values, and the reality of their lives every day, because there's no mitigating method of self-awareness. Anyway, I didn't understand all this at that time. I just wanted to learn how to juggle, so I tried really hard, and what happened? I failed over and over again. The harder I tried, the worse it got. But that's where I actually was introduced to the Alexander technique. And I thought, instead of setting myself up for a series of big failures, why don't I first just bring my attention to the conditions for the best use of myself? So I would pause and I would check that my weight was balanced, that my spine was lengthening, my neck was nice and free, keep my eyes alive, make sure I was breathing in a fuller, easier way, widen my upper back, a little smile always helps. And then I think about what's the lightest, easiest way I can let my hands float up. And then I'd say, what's the easiest way to toss one ball? And I just practice with one ball. I say, can I do one ball, keep breathing, keep smiling? What's the least amount of effort? Then I thought, okay, let me experiment with 2. I thought, as soon as I try to catch the ball, there's a tendency to go into the startle pattern. So I thought, what if I could just focus on the throw and the use of myself and not even think about catching the ball? So I threw 1, 2. And I just let him drop. And I practiced that until it was happening effortlessly. And I said, let me see if I can catch 1. Don't worry about the other one. Let me see if I can catch 2. And they started landing in my hands. So I said, okay, let's try 1, 2, 3. Just throw them all up. Don't even try to catch them. Then I threw 1, 2, 3, and I caught the first one. I let the other 2 drop. And I pause, come back to the directions for the use of myself. Just do a scan to check for anything that I needed to not do. Anything I could let, how was that ankle that my teacher pointed out I was holding on to in my first lesson? Let it be nice and free. I always ask myself, what could be easier? What could be freer? What could be more poised? What could be more enjoyable? What could be more fun? And your system will answer those questions for you. So then I threw 1, 2, 3, and they all landed in my hands. And I achieved my first jugulation. But I then, as now, was interested in multiple jugulation. So I realized I had to keep throwing the balls, which means they keep dropping again. But eventually, you throw 1, 2, 3, 4, let it drop. You throw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let it drop. Then what happens is you shift into the juggling flow state. And the balls start going round by themselves. So that's when now when people ask me how I learned to juggle, I don't tell them the story that I just told you. I tell them this story. I tell them I was walking down the street one day. I saw these balls going round in the infinity pattern. I stood behind them. I've been there ever since. And so what we want in juggling, as in many other things, is to have the right amount of energy in the right place at the right time. So you know what beginner jugglers usually look like? They look like this. Right? There's a lot. The difference between a beginner and a pro, you're doing less. Debbie sang this Vivaldi motet the other night with the Santa Fe Pro Musica. It is a really challenging piece of music. It's just like juggling. It was effortless. You had a nice little smile on your face the whole time. Yeah. And what you know what the trick is when you get good at juggling? If you want to, I used to juggle on the street in Harvard Square. You want people to give you money, you have to make it look difficult. Got to make it look difficult. So what I just gave you was a demonstration of what Alexander meant by pay attention to the means whereby. I wanted to juggle. I wanted to get good at juggling. You know, I became a professional juggler. I juggled live on stage with Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones in front of an audience of over 100,000 people at the Nebworth Rock Festival. I achieved my results as a juggler. But I achieved them by using a more intelligent process. A process that allowed me to be a better juggler and to maintain my own poise and balance and harmony. So I didn't create compensatory maladjustments in learning to juggle. Instead, I did it in a way in harmony with the best use of myself. That's what Alexander meant by attention to the means whereby. It's to think through your goals in the most intelligent way possible. So it's perfect. I love that we do this every year right around New Year's, because everybody's always thinking about their New Year's resolutions. And the reason most New Year's resolutions fail is that they're not done in the context of the whole person, and they're not done with attention to the means whereby. They're end-gaining. If you want your resolutions to succeed, think about your life in a systems context. What's your purpose? What are your values? What's most important to you? Then what are the goals that are reflections of those values? Then translate each one into a specific plan for the year. And then look at how they all connect. You know, you have a goal for your business. Great. How does that fit with your goal for your relationship? How does that fit with the goal for your health? So you look at how it all fits together. How can you be a systems thinker in your life? Alexander was getting us to do this with the self, which makes it, I think, easier to do it with your life. Everything connects to everything else. Any questione?
The juggling demonstration would be an excellent way for a beginning piano student to learn to play piano. You know, play one hand, which this has been suggested, you know,
Mhm.
one hand and then with good use, and then the other, and put them together naturally and easily. So that was a beautiful
Thank you.
example of what these were by.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's why I'm showing it, because I want you to take this and apply it exactly right in the context where you're teaching people, where you're helping people, where you're leading people. Set people up for success. And the use of the self is going to contribute more to their long-term success than just about anything else that they do. That's part of the incredible beauty of this work. It's an amazing gift to have. You can help people understand how to bring to attention the self as part of any learning. As opposed to giving up yourself. I mean, it seems so absurd. Well, just ruin your use to achieve this result. It's ridiculous, but it's very common. And this, you know, the other thing too is that if you're interested in real high performance, if you're interested in operating at a high level in any discipline, then this becomes essential knowledge. If you look at anybody who's really, really great at anything, the best of the best are almost always remarkably poised. They have the right amount of energy in the right place at the right time. I mean, you know, just take performance. Think through the greatest performers you've ever seen in any discipline. You like sports? Think about the best. I mean, okay, so Steph Curry is all the thing now if you like basketball, but there's a reason, because have you ever seen anybody look so ridiculously relaxed? With, you know, just, I mean, he's just having so much fun, and you know it's going in. And he knows it's going in. We all know it's going in. It's really fun to watch.
Why do you think that the technique hasn't taken off in education systems?
That's a great question. I'd say the main reason, you know, the technique's much more popular in England. It's actually more popular in Israel. It's popular in Germany. In the US, it's really only popular in major centers where there are performing arts schools. It's popular in New York because there's the Juilliard School. You studied at Juilliard. It's popular in LA because you're training all the, you know, Michael Frederick works with a lot of the actors and Hollywood stars. Our friend Barrett Arcaya in New York is teaching all the Broadway stars now. They've all figured out, oh yeah, she's the one, and her practice is filled with headliners from Broadway shows. So if there are places where there are major hubs of theatrical interest, technique does pretty well in the United States. But generally speaking, this is a culture of doing. Show me the 10 steps, the 10 exercises that I can do to just, you know, ruin my, obliterate my stomach forever. Yes, it tends to be quick fix, end gaining. I mean, there's, you know, the nice thing is there's a movement towards the Alexander. It's just ahead of its time. It's just ahead of its time here.
After a century later, it's
Well, the thing is also that the other reason, it's part of my passion, it's part of why I'm sharing this with you in this way, is a lot of people who are drawn to the Alexander technique are artistic, fundamentally introverted. They are deeply concerned about playing their violin in the most exquisite way, about moving in an exquisite way. They're not necessarily as oriented towards the extroverted marketing, speaking, selling, and promotion. It was funny, Michael Frederick mentioned that I spoke to the Alexander World Congress. We had the biggest gathering of Alexander technique teachers ever, 700 teachers in Limerick, Ireland. And one of the things they asked me to talk about was how do we sell the Alexander technique? And so the first thing I did was say, Well, I know for many of you sensitive souls, the word sales is going to be much too painful for you to contemplate. So we're going to use the phrase enroll. How do we enroll people in this practice? And they all laugh because they knew that, you know. But people, you have to, we all have to learn how to engage people with this and explain it to them. And that's why I'll finish where I started, is don't be a molecule fondler. So if somebody asks you about the technique, don't talk about the discovery. You don't even necessarily have to talk about the 7 principles. Talk about the benefits. People buy benefits. You enroll them with benefits. Then, when they're interested in the molecules, you can share with them the discovery and the principles, read the books. But begin by sharing the benefits. That's what we began this conversation, by sharing the benefits. And it's if you can get people to understand, most everybody is actually in pain, and most everybody does have compensatory maladjustments, and most everybody's never heard of that idea. And if you communicate it effectively to them, if they're reasonably intelligent at all, and you probably wouldn't be talking to them if they weren't, they'll go like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. It's a missing link. If they're interested in performance, you probably have them already anyway, because they know that there's a reason this is taught at Juilliard. It's a reason that Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward studied it, and Sting studies it, and Sir George Schulte studied it. And so they already know that. But yeah, learn to enroll people.
Michael, how about the corporate world? How does it, you do work in the corporate world, how does it go down there?
Well, I only get hired by the most enlightened visionary leaders.
Who are they?
The scorch the earth, exploit the worker, unconscious types tend not to engage me. So I use the Alexander technique in the corporate world in the context usually of preparing people to give presentations. And what's really great is we videotape them before and after. I did this recently with a group of construction managers, and they're getting ready for a big presentation, and I had them do their presentation, and I give them all the coaching. I wrote a book about presentation skills, but the most important thing I do is say, is it okay if I just put my hands on you very lightly and give you a little sense of how your presence might be a little bit different in front of the group. And so I work with them just a little bit, and they go from, and so the widget will be replaced by the whatever, and then they go, and so the widget. No, I'm only kidding. I instantly turn into Shakespearean. No, but when they stop pulling down, actually I say to them, I say, okay, you just saw Fred do his second presentation. What pay grade would you put him at versus the Fred you saw in the first presentation? And Fred always gets promoted. Right? Fred's now making more money. We can send Fred out at a higher rate because for real. No, for real. I mean, I did a 4-day seminar for senior strategy people from KPMG in London. And I got a note from the guy who ran that team. He said, I was able to send 4 of my people out next week at the next highest rate of consulting because their presence was so much stronger as a result of the session. So yeah, again, it's a missing link, and it's a tremendous benefit.
Benefit, you get paid more.
Yeah, no, but because everybody knows this. You respond to the presence. Everybody wants to have it. The stand like Superwoman for 2 minutes is relatively crude and unsophisticated. This is the most evolved and sophisticated way of thinking about that phenomenon with a methodology to go with it. So think about what you want me to talk about tomorrow and the day after. I take requests, and we'll see you then. Thank you so much.
Awesome.